Hey crew, it's Pitt, and I'm back with some more Socrates. Today we are diving back into the works of Plato, the dialogues of Socrates, and we are in Book 9. Yesterday we wrapped up in Book 8, where we talked about the descent of government in its natural progression to a democracy and then into tyranny, and today we are picking back up that discussion. Then, said I, what remains to be considered is the tyrannical man himself. How he develops from the democratic man, and what he is like then, and whether his manner of life is wretched or blessed. Yes, said he, this fellow remains to be considered. I feel that something is still missing. Do you know what it is? What? I do not think we have adequately distinguished the kind and number of the various desires. Indeed, if we do not remedy this deficiency, the search we are engaged in will lack clarity. Would this not be a good time to do so? Said he. Yes, certainly. And consider what I wish to see in these desires. It is as follows. Among the unnecessary pleasures and desires, some, I believe, are lawless. Although these are probably innate in everyone, they can nevertheless, when restrained by the laws and by the better desires accompanied by reason, be eliminated in some cases, or a few weak ones may be left. But in other cases, those that remain may be stronger and more numerous. Can you say what these desires are? Those that are aroused whenever the rational, gentle part of the soul, the part that rules the other part, is in slumber, and the brutish, wild part, gorged on food or wine, springs to life, refusing to sleep, and sets out to indulge its bad habits. You know that in a situation like this, it dares to do anything at all, as if it had been released from, and was rid of, all shame and understanding. Indeed, it does not shrink, or so it imagines, from intercourse with mother, or anything else at all, man or god or beast. It murders anyone at all, and eats any meat at all, without restraint. And in short, there is no deed, be it mindless or shameless, that it leaves undone. Very true. And yet, when someone keeps himself healthy and of sound mind and goes to sleep having aroused the rational part of himself and feasted it on beautiful words and consideration, he attains concord with himself. He ensures that his appetitive part is neither in want nor fully satisfied, so that it may be lulled to sleep, and not be a source of trouble to the best part of him by being pleased or in pain, but will allow that part just by itself to reflect on its own and aspire or perceive what it does not know of the past, the present, or the future. He calms the spirited part too in the same way, and he will not go to sleep with a troubled heart after being angry with someone. Rather, having quietened the other two parts and activated the third, the one in which understanding resides, he then takes rest. You know that under such circumstances he is most likely to apprehend the truth, and the visions that appear in his dreams are then least likely to be lawless. That is it, said he, entirely so. Well, all of this has led us to say more than we needed to, but what we want to recognize is this, that there is, in fact, some fearsome, savage, and lawless form of desires present in each of us, even in some people who seem to be extremely moderate. And this becomes evident when we are asleep. So I think about whether I am making any sense and whether you agree. Yes, I agree. Well, remember the democratic man and what we said he was like. He presumably became like this by being brought up from his earliest years by a miserly father who had only respect for those desires that make money and had no respect for the unnecessary ones that exist for the sake of amusement, ostentation. Is this so? Yes. But once he associates with cleverer men who are full of the desires we have just described, he rushes in the direction of total excess, adopts the behavior of those newfound friends, and hates the miserliness of his father. But because he is by nature better than his corruptors, he is drawn in both directions and finally takes up a middle position between the two tendencies, managing, so he believes anyway, to enjoy each of them in due measure. He lives a life that is neither devoid of freedom nor utterly lawless. He has been transformed from an oligarchical man into a democratic one. Yes, said he, this was and remains our view of such a person. Then assume once again that a man has already grown older and has a young son who has, in turn, been brought up in the habits of his father. I am assuming this. Assume, too, that the same things happen to his father that also happen to the son. He is drawn to utter lawlessness, which is called total freedom by those who are leading him. His father and other relatives assist those middle desires, while his corruptors, in turn, help the other desires. And when these clever beguilers and tyrant makers make loose hope of controlling the young man by any other means, they contrive to engender a passion in him as a protector of the idle desires that are keen to spend so freely. And the passion in such a people is a huge winged drone. Or do you think this is something else? No, I do not think it is anything else. Now, when the other desires are buzzing about the drone, full of incense, perfume, and garlands, and all the pleasures that are usually let loose at such gatherings, they feed the drone and make it grow and engender in it the sting of desire. Then this protector of the soul, with madness as its bodyguard, goes into full frenzy. And if it detects any opinions or desires within itself that are accounted worthy, or still have any shame, it kills them off and pushes them out of itself until it has been cleansed of sound-mindedness and is full of madness brought in from outside. That, said he, is a comprehensive description of the origin of the tyrannical man. Is this not why Eros has traditionally been called a tyrant? Quite likely. And, my friend, does not a man who is drunk have a certain tyrannical frame of mind? He has. And indeed, someone who is mad or deranged endeavors to exercise authority, not over only men, but over gods too. Or he imagines that he can do so. Very much so. And this, dear fellow, is exactly how a man becomes tyrannical. It happens when, by nature or by his pursuits, or both, he has become drunken, passionate, and maniacal. Entirely so. That, it seems, is how the man originates, and that is what he is like. And how then does he live? You tell me, said he, as people say when they are having fun. I shall. Indeed, I believe that after this they indulge in feasting, carousing, revelry, and womanizing, and all sorts of things associated with people whose entire soul is governed by an indwelling tyrannical passion. Inevitably. Now, do not desires, many and fearsome, spring up alongside this one every day and every night, making many demands, many indeed. So, any sources of income are quickly spent, of course, and after this comes borrowing and the erosion of his estate. Indeed. And when all this fails him, must not there be an outcry from the crowd of the intense desires that have made their nest there? Must not the men themselves be goaded on, so to speak, by the stings of the other desires, and especially by the master passion itself, which leads all the others as if they were its bodyguards? Will they not look about in a frenzy to see who has something that can be taken away by deception or force? Very much so. So he needs to plunder from every quarter, or else be gripped by enormous travails and pains. He must. Now, just as the newer pleasures in him got the better of the old ones and took away all they possessed, so too would not the man himself also, in spite of his youth, feel that he deserves to have more than his father and mother, and to take away and appropriate the family's wealth once he had spent his own portion. Yes, indeed. And if they would not turn it over to him, would he not initially attempt to steal from his parents and deceive them? Absolutely. And if he were unable to do this, would he then seize what he could by force? I think so. And then, my friend, if that elderly man or woman resisted him and put up a fight, would he be careful and spare them from any tyrannical behavior? No, said he, I am not confident about the fate of the parents of a man like this. But, by Zeus, Adeimantus, do you think he would rain down blows upon his aged friend, the friend he needs, his own mother, all because of a newfound girlfriend, a companion he does not need? Would he strike his elderly father, a man in decline, a much-needed and most ancient friend, all because of a newfound boyfriend in his prime, whom he does not really need? And would he let his parents be slaves of these new friends, if he were to bring them all into the same household? Yes, he would, by Zeus. How very blessed it seems to be to bring forth a tyrannical son. Entirely so. But what happens to such a person when the resources of his father and mother fail him? Why, while the swarms of pleasures within him is already growing in size, will he not initially turn his hand to housebreaking or stealing the robe of someone who is out late at night, and then go on to plunder a temple? And in all these exploits, the opinions he held of old since childhood about what is noble and what is shameful, opinions that are accounted just, will be the subject to those opinions newly released from slavery, that constitute the bodyguards of ruling passion and rule alongside it. These were released previously only in dreams, during sleep, when he was still subject to the laws, and to his father, because he was under democratic rule within. But now that he is under the tyranny of passion, the sort of person he occasionally became while dreaming is the sort of person he has now become constantly while awake. He will not refrain from any vile murder. There is nothing he will not eat, no action he will not perform. Passion lives within him as a tyrant, in total anarchy and lawlessness, since it itself is the sole ruler, and like a tyrant in a city, it will lead anyone in whom it resides to utter recklessness. From this, it feeds itself in the rabble that surrounds it, some of which come in from outside from bad company, some of which come from within because of the very same tendencies. His own tendencies in this case have been established and set free. Is this not the life of a man like this leads? It is indeed, said he. And if people of this sort are few in number, while the rest of the population of the city is sound-minded, they leave and act as bodyguards for some other tyrant, or serve as paid mercenaries in time of war. But if they arise in a time of peace, when things are quiet, they stay in the city and do a lot of bad deeds on a small scale. What sort of deeds? Theft, for instance, housebreaking, picking pockets, stealing people's clothes, robbing from temples, and kidnapping. And sometimes, if they're accomplished speakers, they become informers, give false evidence, and take bribes. Yes, small-scale bad deeds indeed, provided such people are few in number. Yes, what is small, relative to what is large, and none of these evils come nigh at all, as they say, to a tyrant, in terms of the corruption and degeneracy of a city. For when such people grow large in number in the city, along with others who follow their lead, they realize how numerous they are. These are the ones who, with assistance from the unthinking general populace, bring forth that tyrant. A particular person who has the greatest and most extensive tyrant within his own soul. Yes, quite likely, since he would be the most tyrannical of them all. That is what happens if the people yield willingly. But if the city will not submit to him, then he acts as he did towards his own father and mother. He will punish his fatherland in the same way that he punished them, if he can, by bringing in his newfound companions. And he will hold and maintain his beloved ancient fatherland or motherland, as the Cretans say, in slavery to them. And this would be the culmination of such a man's desire. It would, said he, entirely so. Well then, said I, how do these people behave as private citizens, even before they have authority? In the first place, will they not spend their time with people who flatter them when they are together, or who are prepared to do anything to serve them? Or, if they want something else from someone else, will they not debase themselves and try any device, as if they were friends, but turn into strangers once their mission is accomplished? Yes, very much so. And so, they live their entire lives without ever being friends to anyone, but always either someone's master or someone else's slave. But the tyrannical nature never gets a true taste of freedom or true friendship. Entirely so. Well then, would it be right to refer to such people as unfaithful? Of course, and unjust too, to the greatest extent possible, if we were indeed correct in agreeing what we agreed previously about what the sort of thing justice is. Well, we were right about that at any rate. To sum it up, let us say this about the most evil person. He would, presumably, even when awake, be the sort of person we described in dreams. Yes, certainly. And he comes into existence when someone who is by nature utterly tyrannical, has sole authority, and the longer he lives the life of the tyrant, the more like this he becomes. He must, said Glaucon, taking up the argument. So, is it the case that whoever proves to be the most evil will also prove to be the most wretched? And is it the case that whoever is a tyrant to the greatest degree for the most time has in truth been most miserable for the most time? But popular opinion on this is quite varied. Well, the situation must be as you describe it, said he. And does the tyrannical man correspond to the tyrannical governed city in likeness? And the democratic man to the democratically governed city, and similarly for others? Of course. Now, as city corresponds to city in excellence and happiness, does one man correspond to another man in this respect too? Of course. Now, in terms of excellence, how does the city governed by a tyrant correspond to the first one we described, the one governed by a king? It is the complete opposite, said he. Indeed, one is the most excellent of all, and the other is the worst. I shall not ask which you were referring to, since it is quite obvious, but would your decision be the same in relation to happiness and wretchedness, or would it be different? And yet, let us not be dazzled by looking at the tyrant in person or a few people in his inner circle. We need to look at the whole city, going into it, delving into every corner and seeing what is there. Then, and only then, may we express our opinion. You are right to challenge me, said he. Indeed, it is obvious to everyone that no city is more wretched than the one that is governed by a tyrant, and none is more happy than one that is governed by a king. Well, said I, what if I were to issue the very same challenges in relation to individual men? Would I be right to suggest that the only person who has the right to decide these issues is someone who is able to use his mind to go deep into the character of a man and see clearly, without being dazzled by the pretense of the tyrannical types? Like a child who only looks from the outside, someone who is well able to see through the pretense that tyrants put on for the world at large. Now, what if I were to presume that we should all listen to that person, the one who is able to make this decision, and who has lived alongside a tyrant and has witnessed his dealings with his household, and how he behaves towards the various members of his family, where he is best seen, stripped of theatrical trappings, and who has seen him amidst the perils of public life? Since this person has seen so much, should we call upon him to report where the tyrant stands relative to others, in terms of hopeless, happiness, and wretchedness? You would be absolutely right to suggest this. Would you like us to pretend to be people who are able to make this decision, and who have already met up with tyrants, so that we may have someone to answer questions we asked? Certainly. Well, come on then and consider the following. Remembering the similarity between the city and the individual man, consider them carefully, each in turn, and describe the characteristics of each. What sort of characteristics? Firstly, to speak of the city, would you say that the one governed by the tyrant is free or enslaved? Enslaved to the greatest extent possible. And yet, you see masters and freemen there. Yes, I see this, and it is a small detail, but the whole population, so to speak, in that city, and the very best part, is dishonorably and miserably enslaved. Now, if the individual is like the city, must not the same state of affairs prevail within him? And must not his soul be full of slavishness and restriction, the very best parts being enslaved, while a small part, the worst and the maddest, is their master? It must be so. In that case, will you maintain that a soul of this sort is enslaved or free? Enslaved, I presume. Furthermore, does not the enslaved, tyrannical governed city do what it wishes to do to the least possible extent? Yes, the very least. So the tyrannically governed soul, too, will do what it wishes to do to the least extent possible. Speaking of the soul as a whole, and being continually impelled by the gadfly of desire, it will be full of confusion and regret, inevitably. And must the tyrannical governed city be wealthy or poor? Poor. So the tyrannical soul, too, must always be in need and dissatisfied. It must. And what about this? Must not a city like this and a person like this be full of fear? That is quite inevitable. And do you think you will find more wailing, groaning, lamentation, and suffering in any other city than you will find in this one? Not at all. And do you think this sort of thing is more prevalent in any other individual than it is in the tyrant, mad with desires and passions? How could I? Now imagine you decided that this city, at any rate, is the most wretched of cities in view of all these considerations and others like them. Was I not right to do so? Very much so, but what do you say in turn about the tyrannical individual in the light of the same considerations? That he is the most wretched by far, more so than any of the others. That is not quite correct. How so? This fellow is not the most wretched, I imagine. Then who is? Surely, someone who will surely seem to you be more wretched than this fellow. Who? Someone with a tyrannical nature who does not live out his life as a private citizen, but, by unfortunate accident, gets the opportunity to become an actual tyrant. I reckon from what has already been said that this is true. Yes, but we should not merely think about the matters of this sort. We should consider them very carefully, using an argument like this. Since our inquiry is concerned with the most important issue of it all, living a good life or a bad one. Quite right. Now, consider if what I am saying makes any sense. For I think this needs to be considered with the following examples in mind. What examples? The example of any private citizen in the city who are wealthy and own a lot of slaves. For they have this in common with tyrants. They rule over many people, although they differ in that the tyrant rules over a greater number. They differ in this way indeed. And you know, do you not, that these people do not live in fear, and they are not terrified of their own household slaves. Yes, for what would they be afraid of? Nothing. But do you recognize the reason why? Yes, because the entire city is there to assist every single private citizen. That is right. But what if some god were to take one man who owned 50 slaves, or even more, and lift him and his wife and children out of the city and set him down in an isolated place, along with his other property and his household slaves, where none of his fellow freemen would be in a position to come to his aid? Can you imagine his fear and how afraid he would be that he, his children, and his wife might be done away with by his own slaves. I think he would be in total fear. Would he not be compelled, at that stage, to ingratiate himself with some of the slaves, make lots of promises, and even set them free when there was no need to? And then he himself would thus turn out to be the flatterer of his own servants. He would have to do that, said he, just to survive. And what if the god were to settle other people around him, lots of neighbors, who would not put up with it if someone were to claim the right to enslave anyone else, and would inflict the most severe punishments on someone who acts like this if they could catch him? I think that he would be in even more difficulty in every respect, being watched from all sides by nothing but enemies. So, is it not the case that the tyrant is bound fast in a prison house like this, since his nature is as we have described it, filled with a huge variety of fears and passions? Although his soul is full of craving, he is the one person in the city who finds it impossible to travel abroad, or to see anything that other free men love to see. Skulking inside of his house most of the time, does he not live like a woman, envying the other citizens if any of them ever travel abroad or see anything good? Yes, entirely so. So does not the man who is ill-governed within, the tyrannical man whom you deemed most wretched, reap an even greater harvest of such evils once he forsakes his private life, and is compelled by some chance event to become a tyrant and attempt to rule others when he cannot even control himself? It is as if someone asked. It is as if someone with a sick body that cannot control itself were compelled to live his life not in privacy, but in constant competition in physical combat. Very true, Socrates. It is exactly like that. Now, dear Glaucon, is this not an entirely wretched predicament? And does not the actual tyrant live an even harsher life than the person whose life you decided was harshest? Definitely, said he. So the truth of the matter, even if someone thinks otherwise, is that the real tyrant is actually a slave to fawning and servitude on a huge scale, and a flatterer of the most vile people of all. Since none of his desires are satisfied, he turns out to be most needy in most respects, and in truth, poor, once someone knows how to look at a soul as a whole. He is full of fear, too, throughout his entire life, beset with convulsions and pains. And if he does indeed resemble the disposition of the city he rules over, and he does resemble this, does he not? Very much so. And in addition to all this, shall we not also ascribe what we spoke of earlier to this man? Must he not be envious, unfaithful, unjust, friendless, and impious, a host and nurturer to every evil? And must he not become even more like this than he previously was? Because he is a ruler, and for all these reasons be most unhappy in himself and make people around him unhappy too. No one with any intelligence will argue against you. Come on now, act like the overall judge in a competition and announce who, in your opinion, comes first in terms of happiness, who comes in second, and so on for the other five in turn. The kingly, the democratic, the oligarchic, the democratic, and the tyrannical. Decide. The decision is an easy one. I judge them as if I were judging theatrical courses, and I rank them in terms of excellence and evil, happiness and its opposite, in the very order in which they made their entrance. Shall we hire a herald, then? Or shall I myself proclaim that the son of Ariston has decided that the best and most just person is also the happiest, and this is the most kingly person who exercises kingly rule over himself, and that the worst and most unjust person is also the most wretched, and he, for his part, turns out to be the most tyrannical person who tyrannizes the greatest extent possible extent over himself and over the city too. Consider it done. And should I declare in addition that this is the case whether their dispositions are noticed by all men or gods or not? Add that declaration. So be it. And this would be one of our proofs. But take a look at the second one and see if it amounts to anything. What is it? Since the city is divided into three parts, and the soul of each individual is threefold in like manner, this, I believe, will afford another proof. In what way? As follows. It seems to me that there are three kinds of pleasures corresponding to the three parts of the soul, one pleasure being particular to each part, and that the same goes for desires and for ways of ruling the soul. What do you mean? There is, according to us, one part with which a person learns, and another with which he becomes spirited. We were unable to provide a particular name for the third, since it's complex, so we named it after its largest and strongest aspect. We called it the appetitive part, due to the intensity of its appetite for food, drink, and sex, and everything associated with these. We called it money-loving, too, because such appetites are satisfied mainly through money. And we were right to do so. Well then, if we were to say that the pleasure and love belonging to this part was for profit, would that best summarize the argument, so that we would be confident that we are referring to this part of the soul correctly when we refer to it as money-loving or profit-loving? It seems to me, anyway. What about this? Do we not maintain that the spirited part is always wholly intent upon power, victory, and fame? Very much so. Now, if we were to refer to it as ambitious and in love with honor, would that seem right? Right indeed. But of course, it is obvious to everyone that the parts by which we learn is always intent upon knowing the truth as it is. And of the three parts, this one is least interested in money and reputation. The least by far. Would it be appropriate then for us to refer to it as having a love of learning and of wisdom? Yes, of course. Is it not the case that this part of the soul rules some people, while one of the other two rules the souls of others, as the case may be? Quite so. For these reasons, then, we say that the principal kinds of human beings are also three in number: the kind that loves wisdom, the kind that loves winning, and the kind that loves profit. Exactly. And are there not three forms of pleasure, one underlying each of these? Entirely so. Now, you do realize, do you not, that if you decided to ask three people of this sort, each in turn, which of these lives is most pleasant, each would praise his own life, his own way of life the most. Will not the moneymaker maintain that unless he makes money from them, the pleasures of attaining honor or learning are worthless in comparison with the pleasure of making profit? True. What about the kind that loves honor? Will he not regard the pleasure that comes from money as vulgar, and the pleasure that comes from learning, for its part, as insubstantial nonsense, unless the learning confers some honor? That is his position. And how do we think the lover of wisdom will regard the other pleasures, in comparison with knowing the truth as it is, and being continually involved in something like this while he is learning? Will not the other pleasures be far removed from this pleasure, and will he not refer to them as necessary, in a literal sense, because he would have no need for any of them unless necessity was involved? This needs to be well understood. Now, when there is a dispute over the pleasures of each kind and over the life itself, not only over which life is more noble or more shameful, which is worse and which is better, but over which life is actually more pleasant and least painful, how are we to know which of them is really speaking the truth? I cannot say, he replied. Well, consider it this way. What should things be judged by if they are going to be properly judged? Is it not by experience, intelligence, and argument? Or could anyone have a better criterion than these? How could they? Then consider this. Of the three men, who among them has the most experience of all the pleasures we mentioned? Does the lover of profit, by understanding truth itself and what it is like, seem to you have more experience of the pleasure of knowledge than the lover of wisdom has the pleasure of that comes from making a profit? There is a big difference, said he. Indeed, the lover of wisdom, of necessity, tastes the other pleasures from his earliest childhood. But there is no necessity that the lover of profit taste the pleasure of learning of nature of things of learning the nature of things that are, and how sweet that pleasure is, or that he have any experience of this. And even if he is eager to do so, it is not easy. There is a big difference then, said I, between the lover of wisdom and the lover of profit, and their experience of both these pleasures. Big indeed. And how does he compare to the lover of honor? Does the lover of wisdom have less experience of the pleasure of attaining honor than the profit lover has the pleasure of intellect? No, said he, honor accrues to them all, once they achieve whatever they are intent upon. Indeed, the wealthy are honored by lots of people, and so too are the courageous and the wise. So they all have experience of the kind of pleasure that comes from attaining honor. But it is impossible for anyone, except the lover of wisdom, to have tasted the kind of pleasure that comes from beholding what is. So in terms of experience, he is a better judge than any of the others. Much better. And indeed, he alone will have gained this experience in the company of intelligence. Indeed. Then again, the instrument that is needed in order to judge is not the instrument of the profit lover or of the lover of honor, but the lover of wisdom. What is it? I think we said that it is necessary to judge by the means of arguments. Is this so? Yes. And the arguments are the instrument of the philosopher, most of all? They must be. Now, if whatever is to be judged were best judged by wealth and profit, then the things that the profit lover praised and censured would necessarily be the truest of all, would they not? Much the truest. And if they were judged by honor, victory, and courage, would not whatever is praised by the ambitious lover of honor be truest? Obviously. But since they must be judged by experience, intelligence, and argument, what follows? It must be the case that whatever the lover of wisdom and argument praises is the truest. So of the three pleasures, would the one that belongs to the part of the soul we learn with be most pleasant? And would the life of the person in whom this part rules be the most pleasant life of the three? How can it be otherwise? The man of intelligence is the one who has complete authority and praise to praise his own life. And that is where we're going to go ahead and wrap this one up. We're about halfway. It's getting long on time. It's right about the time to go ahead and do that. So we will be continuing with the rest of this argument in the next session. But for now, we have seen the descent of man into tyranny. Now we are arguing about what is the best of the pleasures, and that's going to lead into another discussion. So I'm going to leave the link down below like I always do, and y'all should definitely go back and reread this. So read it out loud for yourselves. Say these things for yourselves so that you can comprehend them. Some people can hear it, some people need to say it, some people need to write it. So whatever you need to do, understand what is being said here. This was 400 years before the birth of Christ. The things that he is describing here is things that have happened for thousands of years prior to that. The cycle of mankind through these governments is pretty trackable, and it's pretty wild how it actually works. And so we need to be on guard to keep our republic safe. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt's Take. Peace.